With the unprecedented success of the late 2018's Chainsaw Man, Tatsuki Fujimoto has seen his work skyrocketed into the mainstream. Though what some might not know about Fujimoto is that he has been a mangaka for quite a while now, starting out in the business as early back as 2011 at the young age of 17, long before he would even graduate from university. And since then, he has been making manga non-stop for nearly 12 years. Though where most of his body of work is comprised of one-shot stories, he has 2 serialized works and a sort of weird webcomic that we'll get to in the future. Though each of these one-shots is important in their own right, as Fujimoto's approach to writing and design, while being obviously full of outside influences, is just as self-referential, and the one-shots have allowed him the ability to experiment and get a good footing for major ideas that he would like to play with, as well as major designs, or to simply vent his emotions. And due to this method of writing, just about everything Fujimoto has worked on has been both varied in style and tone. Also, alongside the emotion he puts into the stories, there's always this underlining message about identity and the power associated with your own. So in this retrospective series, I wanted to go through all of Fujimoto's works by release order and discuss the themes and influences in them, as well as hopefully helping people gain a better appreciation of his work both then and now. So please, get yourself a soda, some caramel popcorn, and find your seat in Theater Fujimoto for our first showing. Niwa Niwatori ga ita, also known as There Are 2 Chickens in the Garden. Now, before we discuss Niwatori ga ita, I think it's important that we understand Fujimoto's own history leading up to its creation and release, as he's mentioned before in past interviews that Fujimoto uses his manga, particularly his one-shots, in order to vent his emotions to the world, as he doesn't do so on online platforms. And because of that, I believe that mindset can go on to influence the work that he was creating. So with that, let's start at the very beginning. Tatsuki Fujimoto was born October 10th, 1992, or 93, as there is conflicting reports about this, in Nikoho, a small city in the Akita prefecture of Japan. And from an early age, he found a passion for drawing and more specifically manga, claiming that in his early teens he had an entire fantasy manga magazine all to himself. It was created entirely in his head, but it did have at least 7 different series running in it at any given time, and even a changing roster of stories that would swap out when the other ended. Sometimes when imagining reading these series, Fujimoto would find himself being brought to tears by their endings, but this crying got him bullied, so he stopped reading them in public. Now, why this is important is that these mental magazines have gone on to impact his later creations, as one of the most famous examples being a story he called Breath of the Stars, and its lead character that eventually went on to become Makima in Chainsaw Man. Now, while he did have a passion for drawing and was full of ideas, Fujimoto didn't exactly have the drawing talent required to make manga like he wanted. This problem wasn't helped by the fact that Fujimoto's hometown didn't have any drawing-focused art schools that would help him improve on the basics. Instead, he would accompany his grandparents to their painting classes, and use the supplies there to learn more about art, and it was here he found his interest in oil paintings. Eventually, his interest in these paintings would lead him to majoring in the field at an art academy in Yamagata, though it was here in college that he would spend his free time practicing gestures in the library, as oil paintings didn't exactly get him what he hoped for when it came to manga making. But the talents he did acquire here would later help his future series stick out among other artists, especially when it came to his mesmerizingly beautiful cover arts. Though early into his college career in 2011, Fujimoto would write and submit a one-shot, this being Niwa Niwatori ga ita, into the monthly magazine Jump Square's manga contest. Jump Square was just the magazine he was reading at the time, and this went on to place as one of the top finalists in the monthly contest, but it did not win. But all that mattered is that this contest did get Fujimoto's name out to a larger audience of people and helped begin his manga career, as well as introducing him to his future editor, and honest-to-God superhero of the manga industry, Shihei Lin, who would go on to foster and encourage habits in Fujimoto that would help his series shine in the future. One great example of this being when Lin mailed Fujimoto boxes of mangas and DVDs from great creators and told him to begin consuming them, since Fujimoto liked to put scenes and characters from things that he liked into his work. Lin hoped that this would help him put good things into his work to help the work itself become good. This developed into a trend that we can see beginning to form in Niwatori ga Ita. Starting first, let's look into the name of the story itself. Niwa Niwatori ga Ita essentially translates to "there are two chickens in the garden," and is taken from a much longer Japanese tongue twister, Niwa Niwatori ga Ita, which essentially means there are two chickens in the back garden and two in the front. Now, this title was likely selected because Japanese readers would immediately recognize it, but it doesn't give away exactly what the story will be about. As well, the choice of this title does actually make sense for the story itself, it just might not be recognizable till the end of the story. Now, we open into Niwatori ga Ita in the bedroom of a young man who seems to be sleeping through his alarm. But when he finally wakes up, it reveals that he isn't any ordinary young boy, but an alien, and he isn't alone in this world, as his mother and other classmates are aliens as well. Now, his name is Yohei, and alongside his family, they all seem to be inspired by one of the most popular alien designs around the world, the Grey Aliens, or Zeta Reptilians. Now, his name is comprised of the characters for Sunshine and Peace, and is a name that directly matches his heroic actions later in the story. As well, his friend here is Tomomi, which is a name that essentially means beautiful, but is written in an interesting way, as it is comprised of these characters, with the first one being non-standard for Japanese names, and is harmonious with a complex Japanese term called Moe. With this in mind, I feel like her name is perfectly selected, given the joke of her character is that she has a lot of cutesy characteristic traits, such as a large ribbon on her head and her tsundere-like personality, all contrasting her muscular, monstrous appearance and aggressive text bubbles. And her alien design seems to be in reference to a common trend when it comes to making aliens, as we tend to like to make them insectoid-like creatures, as seen in a plethora of different series, with one of her most noticeable traits being her large stag beetle like head and mouth. Though amongst the new population of Earth, Yohei and Tomomi are actually pretty normal, as we see the world has now become overpopulated with aliens instead of humans. Yet, everyone on the Earth, no matter their shape or size, acts suspiciously like the missing man, with the older of them going to work, and the younger of them being sent to schools and assigned certain student-like specific duties, with Yohei this morning specifically being put on morning duty, which involves him feeding the class pets, the chickens. And it's here that we meet the actual two leads of the story, living as chickens in the garden. Or should I say, wearing chicken disguises? Because to call them disguises is a bit generous, as the two of them are dressed in relatively normal clothing and wearing long capes with massive chicken masks. Though to the aliens, like Tomomi, who have never seen a chicken before and aren't all that interested in them, this was enough to fool them. Now, these two are Ami and Yuto, and both of their names are written out in simplified Japanese, so there doesn't seem to be any inherent meaning behind them, though the names themselves are harmonious with names just like them, with Yuto being a name often comprised of terms like courage and helpful, and with Ami, her name tends to mean my nation or country. Though, why have these two taken up residence in a garden surrounded by aliens? Well, Yuto explains that in the year 2019, a war between aliens and humans had broke out, and the humans had lost. This was partly due to the fact that all aliens possessed a powerful ability to transform into terrifying monsters, which essentially shredded through humans like paper. Worse yet, the aliens also developed a taste for humans, and soon started devouring them wholesale. But eventually, other aliens learned about human culture and found it infinitely fascinating, deciding that they would come to Earth in hopes of replicating the world's culture and pretend to be humans while they ate any survivors that they discovered. Though, these aliens could only distinguish humans by their faces, and thus Yuto and Ami were fortunate enough to stumble upon chicken disguises from a school play, which explains the amateurish design. And due to the aliens of the regions not really finding chickens all that appetizing, they adopted them as pets rather than as meals. And since then, Ami and Yuto have been living in the school and eating the food provided to them, hoping that one day the aliens will grow bored of Earth and leave entirely. Though these two weren't the only survivors waiting for the aliens to leave either, as back at the school, Yohei's friend begins to tell him that the aliens have caught wind that there is some sort of human resistance base somewhere in the world, and that there must be an alien helping hide these humans from the other invaders. And in hearing about this, we see that Yohei seems to be a bit of a human sympathizer as well, questioning if it's even right to eat humans because they possess such a high level of intellect, which is reinforced by the fact that everything they are doing right now is directly lifted from human culture. But Tomomi injects that humans used to eat cattle and pigs, which are also considered to be of high intellect, so what the aliens are doing must be no different than what the humans did. Afterwards, Yohei decides to take a stand and possibly save the two chickens in the garden, as he realized that they were humans long before anyone else, mainly because, unlike most aliens of the region, Yohei did his actual research into the culture of the world that he was living on, and knew that chickens were supposed to be small and have feathers. So he confronted both Yuto and Ami on this, because unfortunately for them, this hiding spot would not be safe for much longer, as a new transfer student was coming to school, and he is from a race of aliens who like eating chickens. So he decides to formulate a plan to keep them safe. And just as quickly, the new student catches wind of chickens in the garden. He transforms in a hungry frenzy, leaping through the building and landing in the back area, heading directly toward the garden where he finds in the chicken pen Ami and Yuto revised into kitten disguises. But little did Yohei know that the transfer student also likes to eat kittens too. He snatches up Ami and she immediately cries out for Yuto to save her, but before he can act, Yohei transforms as well, and strikes the transfer student in the neck, catching Ami in his hands while hoping he didn't seriously hurt the new guy too much, as Yohei still believes humans shouldn't be killed, but the new kid was just simply acting on his nature, and Yohei didn't judge him for that. This is because, much like his name suggests, Yohei simply wants peace between the two species. Though, this whole encounter caused a big commotion, and soon the other students would arrive to discover that the chickens were in fact humans, and Yohei was holding one in his arms. Scooping up Yuto, he then headed out to the mountains, and reveals to them that the alien who has been saving humans and keeping them safe was Yohei this entire time, which might explain why he was waking up so late for school, and why he was so interested in the story his friend was telling. Though, right when they were about to get into the range of the mountains, a massive fist comes crashing down on the group, luckily not hurting Ami, but completely crushing Yohei, killing him instantly, as well as injuring Yuto. This fist belonged to a police officer alien, one that was likely called by the school after Yohei's little incident earlier. The officer sternly explains to the two humans below that they have no rights and shall be executed, showing a different level of cruelty than we've seen before. As earlier, humans were executed and eaten. The police officer here simply wants to crush them like bugs. Yuto then begs Ami to flee without him and get to the mountains where she'd be safe. But she couldn't leave without him, and in what seems to be their final moments, the events of 6 months ago flashes before Yuto's eyes. What we see from here is how brutal the alien invasion of Earth was, with monstrous creatures wiping out humans in droves, and Yuto, he was one of them. Having seemingly attacked a school play amidst its practice, he slaughtered everyone, excluding for the young Ami, who was hiding just prior. She calls out Yuto for his ruthless, cruel murder of her friends and classmates, and when Yuto responds with the same propaganda of humans eat cattle and pigs so there's no difference, Ami questions if he could accept the same logic if it was his race being eaten. These words cause Yuto to question his actions, and after knocking Ami unconscious, he decided that to understand and answer this question, he would need to pretend to be human and understand just how it felt to be hunted and killed by aliens. And in doing so, he quickly became aware that this slaughter of humans was not the same as cattle. They were creatures worthy of protection, and he grew emotionally attached to Ami in the same way that she did to him. And because of this, he swore to himself that he must protect her no matter what. But the only way he could save her now was to shatter the bond he worked so hard to maintain. His small hand catches the massive fist heading towards the both of them, stopping the police officer in his tracks. And as he stands over Ami, the chicken disguise he was wearing finally cracks, hatching like an egg. Yuto's face finally revealed, he cruelly tells Ami that he was always planning to eat her from the start, and that instead of waiting like he was going to do it right now. Ami, seeing his face and hearing his words, remembers that he is the attacker from that day, and breaks down. She runs away crying into the mountains, where she is finally rejoined with the human refugees and lives on in safety. And with that, Yuto turns to the police officer and finally transforms himself. Which I think now is the best time to discuss the transformation forms in general, as they may seem pretty familiar to you if you've seen a lot of Fujimoto's work, as his transform monster designs tend to match up with the iguana designs from Tsutomu Nihei's manga series Uehara, which Fujimoto claims that he is a fan of and would go on to be inspired for in his other works, like Naruto of the Prophecy and Chainsaw Man. These designs, such as Yuto's transformation appearance, also seem to be reused in later designs in Chainsaw Man, as well Yuhei's transform design appears to be reused in Fire Punch for the nameless pervert. He's the guy who could bend metal. Fujimoto didn't give a lot of names to his Fire Punch characters. Also, an interesting note based on Yuto's transformation state is that it gives him dark black colored skin, where all the other aliens that transformed throughout Niwatori ga Ita gain this pale white skin. And this, in fact, could be a direct reference back to Uehara, given that in Uehara there are black and white iguanas, with the black ones considered to be the protectors of humanity, while the white ones try to consume and destroy them. And thus, I believe that Fujimoto was associating this darker color with the black iguanas and considers them to be the colors of a hero, which is a trend that does continue on into some of his future work, with a lot of his protagonists having a main dark color scheme. And the only outlier in this would actually be Yuhei, as when he transforms he does gain the same pale white skin as everyone else around him, but he does spend his entire time in his transformated state wearing his black school uniform over top it, which to me puts him in the same category as Yuto's transformation state. Now, Yuto's alien design and appearance is rather interesting, as I believe it might be in reference in part to Hellboy, with the side of his head having what looks like filed down or broken horns on it, which are confirmed to be the case when he actually transforms and they grow back, as well as the horn on the front of his head growing longer, which, in the story of Hellboy, if you didn't know, the titular character specifically files down his horn so he can more easily blend in with society, which is what Yuto was doing throughout most of Niwatori ga Ita, and Hellboy is a common series that Fujimoto goes back to for references in his later works, with the most famous examples of this being coming from Chainsaw Man. As well, the scene where Yuto catches a fist is seemingly in reference to Fooly Cooly, where Kanti transforms to protect Momimi from a giant mecha. This is one of the most iconic moments in Fooly Cooly, and much like Uehara, it is a series that would go on to impact Fujimoto's future work like Chainsaw Man. It is also possible that Chainsaw Man's powers' relationship with Meowie is in reference to this moment between Yuto and Ami, as both scenes show a human-eating monster claiming to only be fattening up something in which they actually have a lot of genuine love for. Yuto ends the story by confronting the police officer at his full strength, while Tomomi looks over the corpse of her crushed crush, Yuhei, showing that the alien's actions have resulted in both sides of the war getting hurt, and likely causing her to feel a smidge of guilt, as if she might be partly responsible for driving him to this point, with her and the common people's views on humans. Along with this, Yuto wanted Ami and the aliens to carry with them this story of hope, bitter truth, and a future where humans and aliens could coexist. A story about two chickens in the garden. Now, theme-wise, Niwatori ga Ita has a lot of overlapping ideas. First is the theme of Fujimoto's mindset at the time of writing the story, which he claims that he was always hungry, which likely impacted the reoccurring focus and threat of becoming food in the story, as the main talking point of it is about the morals that goes into raising livestock in order to eat them, as well as focusing on chickens, which is the second most common animal bred for consumption, which is as true now as it was way back in 2011. And this focus on food, with both the power associated with eating as well as the helplessness tied to becoming one's meal, would be a mainstay in Fujimoto's own work, as food is a main point of interest in his stories as well as his online interactions, discussing what he's eaten as of recently or what he recommends. It went on to even his author comments. It tends to always be about food, because food and its importance has become almost synonymous with Fujimoto and his works. Though the characters of Niwatori ga Ita taking on the appearance of chickens may also be an ironic play on them hiding in fear from being eaten, as calling someone a chicken is a way of implying that they are cowardly in some way, and this even works with their designs being changed into cats, as it plays with the term scaredy cat. Though the most important element of the story is Yuto's adoption of a new identity and the inevitable return to his original, as in donning the chicken mask, Yuto has become a human and experiences the world from their perspective. His human identity was important to him and allowed him to be close with someone as he grew to care deeply about them, struggling to abandon it even in dire situations like when the school bully begins to eat her. But the mask is simply that. A mask, something that cracks under pressure. But thanks to the egg symbology, we can assume that Yuto has changed as a person as well, as even though on the surface level he plays the cold-hearted alien that drove away the girl that he grew to love, he also stood up against the injustices of the world that he learned about thanks to him adopting his human identity. In a way, Yuto became a hero, the same way Yohei wanted to be. Niwatori ga Ita is a strong start for Fujimoto in my opinion, as it contains a perfect level of his dark sense of humor, while also acting as a great introduction for a lot of the themes that we'll see going forward. As well, the quality of the visuals in the manga are especially interesting because of how quickly it was created, as in an interview following the re-release of Niwatori ga Ita, he explains not only was this his first physical manga, but he had also skipped out on the storyboarding process altogether. Instead, he went directly into the inking process, which only took him about 3 months to complete. And because of this, Fujimoto would hit the ground running from this point on, constantly submitting new one-shot manuscripts and storyboards to his editor, with a famous example being when he sent in his next manga on New Year's Day, less than a month after Niwatori ga Ita had originally been shown. He also claims that at the height of his career, he would send in storyboards for manga every day, just throwing everything he could at Lin, hoping to create something great, though even he admits that only about 1 in 10 were of any quality. In fact, Fujimoto tends to be one of his harshest critics. When he talked about Niwatori ga Ita himself, he began to discuss how he found the series boring, and he just kept referring to it as not interesting. And that makes sense, as Niwatori ga Ita is one of his simplest works. While it's a strong start, it's definitely not comparable to a lot of his future work. But it is kind of adorable when you read this interview and you see Fujimoto calling his work just boring, that you see Lin come in and be like, well, actually, it's probably boring because he means this. They seem to have a very fun working relationship. And with that, this showing is leading to its wrap. Thank you all for joining me for the first of many Fujimoto theaters. And prepare for next time, when we discuss not only the one-shots that still haven't been archived, but also what Fujimoto released in 2013, this being the story of the impossible becoming real in Sasaki-kun ga Judan Tometa, also known as Sasaki-kun has stopped the bullet.